Mark stared in disbelief as the cold, severed internet cable dangled like a noose around his family's connection to the world, cut without warning, without reason. His home went dark, silent, trapped in isolation by the very neighbors sworn to protect it. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Mark stared at the dead screen, disbelief twisting into a tightening knot of anger deep in his chest. The blinking cursor on his laptop mocked him. No connection, no emails, no work. It was as if someone had pulled the plug on his life overnight. This wasn't just a technical glitch. It was a deliberate act of sabotage. The cold chill outside seemed to seep inside, blending with the icy realization that the very community he'd trusted was now conspiring against him. He replayed the previous months in his mind. The Oak Ridge estates had seemed idyllic at first. Tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and neighbors who exchanged polite hellos. The HOA, led by Linda Baxter, presented themselves as guardians of the neighborhood's charm and order. Mark never imagined their reach would extend this far into his personal space and livelihood. It was an invasion that cut through more than just fiber optic cables. It shredded trust, security, and his sense of belonging. Linda Baxter's cold, clipped explanation gnawed at him. "You installed an external router without approval." The words felt trivial, almost laughable in the grand scheme, but the HOA wielded them like a weapon. Mark remembered how he'd simply set up the router on the porch to boost the signal, hoping to ensure his kids could attend their virtual classes without interruption. He'd emailed the HOA office weeks ago, never received a clear response, and assumed silent approval. Instead, the board twisted silence into permission to punish. His mind flicked to his children's faces. Sarah struggling to connect with her teacher, Tommy's frustrated sighs during math lessons. The internet wasn't a luxury for them. It was the gateway to education, friendship, and normalcy during an uncertain time. Now those lines were severed, and the board's cold enforcement felt like a calculated act to isolate, to make an example out of him. Mark's attempts to communicate with Linda had been met with steely refusal. Every plea, every email was bounced back with formal letters citing community guidelines and preservation of neighborhood aesthetics. Worse, Linda warned neighbors not to offer help or even sympathize. The warmth that once defined Oak Ridge was replaced by suspicion and cold shoulders. Mark's calls to friends in the neighborhood were met with silence or evasive excuses. It was a social exile as much as a technical one. Anger burned behind his eyes as he considered the implications. This wasn't just about an internet router anymore. It was a battle for respect, autonomy, and dignity. The HOA board's actions revealed a dark undercurrent of power abuse masked by veneer of civility. Linda and her cronies weren't just enforcing rules, they were wielding them like chains. Mark clenched his fists, pacing the living room. The quiet hum of the heating system was the only sound. The silence felt heavier than ever, amplified by the absence of connection to the outside world. He could almost hear the laughter of neighbors beyond his window, the buzz of online lives carrying on while his family was cut off. But beneath the rage was a deeper sting. The betrayal. The neighborhood he'd invested in, the community he'd hoped to grow roots in, was now a battleground. The sense of injustice clawed at him relentlessly. How could something as essential as internet access be held hostage by a petty dispute? Why had the HOA chosen to punish him so harshly without so much as a warning or chance to fix the issue? Mark sat down heavily, rubbing his temples. The humiliation, the helplessness, and the isolation coiled tightly in his chest. This wasn't just a technical inconvenience. It was a personal assault. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across his powerless home, Mark knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't going to let this go unanswered. Mark sat in his garage, surrounded by dust-covered relics of a past era. Old routers, tangled Ethernet cables, and a clunky dial-up modem he hadn't touched since college. The device looked laughably outdated, a dinosaur in an age dominated by fiber optics and lightning-fast connections. Yet, in Mark's mind, it was a weapon of resistance, a way to reclaim control in a battle that had stripped him of the most basic necessity for his family's survival: the internet. He connected the modem to a spare laptop and began configuring it, his fingers moving with a mix of frustration and determination. The signal he could broadcast was agonizingly slow, barely enough to load a simple web page, let alone stream video or manage a work meeting. But it was enough to send a clear message: he wouldn't be silenced or cut off without a fight. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was turning back the clock, using archaic technology to disrupt the polished digital veneer the HOA had tried to control so meticulously. Once the makeshift dial-up Wi-Fi was operational, Mark's next move was strategic and deliberate. He positioned the signal to overlap with the Oak Ridge Estates clubhouse, the very heart of the HOA's power. The clubhouse internet, once a seamless luxury enjoyed by the board members, was now tainted by buffering icons, pixelated video feeds, and the infuriating crawl of a lagging connection. Mark imagined the board members, suits pressed and faces taut with frustration, trying to host meetings while their high-speed network betrayed them. News of the disruption spread quickly. Linda Baxter, the HOA president, was visibly rattled. She called emergency sessions, her voice sharp as she demanded the source of the interference be identified and eliminated. The veneer of control she had so carefully maintained cracked under the weight of technical chaos that Mark had unleashed. Official notices went out, warning residents of unauthorized network interference and threatening severe consequences. But beneath the official complaints, a different sentiment brewed among the residents. Whispers of support for Mark circulated quietly in the shadows. Many neighbors, long disillusioned by the board's petty micromanagement and cold authoritarianism, found a glimmer of hope in Mark's defiance. They saw in him not just a troublemaker, but a symbol of resistance against the suffocating grip of the HOA. Private messages and furtive nods of approval spoke volumes more than public statements ever could. Mark's motivation transcended mere retaliation. Each moment of digital disruption was a calculated reminder to the board. The power they wielded came with responsibility, and when abused, it could be challenged. He wasn't seeking victory for its own sake, but striving to reveal the fragility beneath the polished facade of community order. The HOA's claim to protect standards now seemed hollow, exposed as a thin cover for petty power struggles. Tensions ratcheted upward as the board prepared legal threats, citing interference with community infrastructure and potential harm to residents' services. Mark read each letter with a grim smile, knowing the escalation was inevitable but necessary. The looming confrontation was no longer just about internet access. It was about accountability, about standing up to unchecked authority that wielded control like a weapon rather than a stewardship. In the quiet moments, Mark stared out his window, watching the fading autumn light cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Oak Ridge Estates. The battle lines were drawn not just in bytes and signals, but in ideals. Somewhere beneath the surface of this escalating conflict lay the question of what community truly meant: order enforced by fear, or trust earned through respect. Mark wasn't sure where this fight would end, but one thing was clear: he would never surrender to silence again. But the victory extended far beyond the restoration of service. The board committed to a comprehensive review of their policies, promising transparency, fairness, and accountability. Mark's fight had illuminated the dangers of unchecked power, catalyzing a shift that echoed through the neighborhood's corridors and into the hearts of its residents. Where once there was fear and silence, now bloomed conversation and community engagement. In that moment, Mark's triumph was a beacon of inspiration, proof that resistance grounded in truth and perseverance could dismantle oppressive structures. The neighborhood was no longer a collection of isolated households, but a connected community, awakened to its collective strength. His story spread, whispered across fences and dinner tables, a rallying cry for those who felt unseen and unheard. The cables restored, the internet streaming freely once more. Mark understood that his battle transcended technology. It was a reckoning with the very essence of power and justice, a reminder that even in the face of intimidation, standing firm could reclaim not only connectivity, but dignity. Oak Ridge Estates was no longer just a neighborhood defined by manicured lawns and HOA rules. It was a living testament to the courage of one man who refused to be cut off, sparking a transformation that would resonate far beyond its borders.